let you have the floor, okay? I'll let you go ahead, and I just interrupt when I have a question, okay? I don't have like standard interviewer questions. I'm real laid back. I'll just like interrupt you, like we're just having a regular conversation.
Okay.
I'll just interrupt you. So be warned, I'll interrupt you.
Oh, no problem. I'll just go to it, and if there's something that catches you and you want to stop me, feel free. Because I just kind of flow with it. So
okay, because I'm very visual, and I like to see everything you're saying, and if I'm missing a picture, I'm like, wait a minute, what? You know what I mean? Like, because I'm not seeing it. So fill me in. I want to go there with you.
Okay, feel free.
Okay.
So I'll start with my near-death experience goes all the way back to 1982.
Okay.
And at that time, I was 32 years old, and my husband and I were living in Alaska. We had moved there, sold everything, because we had both grown up and lived in upstate New York where our families were. But my husband had a friend from the Navy who had always lived in Alaska, and they became, when they became friends, they stayed in touch after he was out of the service. And so he had contacted my husband, and he said, I know you work in machine shop and do that work. And, he said, I think that you and your family could do wonderful if you would come here to Alaska, and so he said, you ought to really think about it. And we made a trip up and visited, and then we just bit the bullet and said, yep, let's do it. If we're ever going to do a huge thing like this, young kids of, like they were like 5 and 8 at the time, this is the time to do it. They're haven't got long-term friends in school, Yeah. So anyway, we sold our house, we sold everything. We packed up a pickup truck full of stuff and towed our little car behind the truck and all set off and went to Alaska. So we had been there about a year when I injured my back. I'm working with a patient that was comatose. And anyway.
You're a physical therapist, right?
Yep, as a physical therapist. And so anyway, 5 years prior to that, I had also had a ruptured disc in my back and had to have laminectomy surgery. So this time around, went through all sorts of conservative treatment and finally decided that, it looked like surgery was going to be needed again. So didn't know, the doctor wasn't sure, depending on the level of the disc that was involved, which they had some uncertainty about, whether I'd have to have another laminectomy at a different level, or whether they'd have to actually do a spinal fusion. And I really didn't want the spinal fusion. Long-term rehab, probably couldn't do physical therapy work anymore. So I started contacting family back in New York and coworkers and church members there in Alaska, and said, I've got my date for my surgery. Could you please just pray on that day? Because I really want this to be another laminectomy. I recovered from that well, and that would preserve my career. And, that was all that I had in mind. Mm-hmm. So anyway, the day of the surgery came after having contacted all these people and stuff. And my husband and the kids came, and I was taken into surgery, and they were taken to a waiting room, and I was put under anesthesia, still not knowing which surgery they'd end up going for. And so I'm out under anesthesia, and then all of a sudden, I'm not out. My consciousness literally had left my body and was up like in a corner of the operating room near the ceiling in one corner. And I was just inches away from ceiling tiles. And I started hearing all of this noise and ruckus, and it drew my attention back. And it was just as they were flipping my body over from being face down to being face up. And I realized that that was my body, that I was not in my body. And so my immediate thought was, I must be dead. And the surgeons swearing at the nurses and telling them to go and get blood transfusion. And it was just a total scene of chaos in there. And I didn't feel attached to my body at all. It was just like, yeah, that's my body, but I'm here. I'm me. And the only concern I had was, well, wait a minute, my husband and the kids are in a waiting room. Somehow I've got to let them know that I'm all right. I'm alive.
Where were you? What was your view from?
My view was from up in the corner of the operating room, up near the ceiling. And I was viewing down toward the operating room table and seeing the nurse, rushing out, and the doctor yelling at her and swearing, and the anesthesiologist, saying that they'd lost my blood pressure, and all of this stuff. So anyway, heard all of that, but my concern was for the waiting room. So as soon as I started having that concern, my consciousness literally, it drifted through the wall of the operating room and out into the hallway that I'd come down, and then past these other operating rooms and through double doors, right as though the doors didn't exist, and out into a hallway, another hallway, and thought that I was trying to get to this waiting room, though I didn't know where it was. And as I'm moving along, all of a sudden, a telepathic voice said to me, pay attention to this man. And I realized that there was a man that was rushing back the way I had come from. And as soon as they said that, the voice said that, I was able to see him up really close, as though I had a microscope. And I could see his hair color and his eye color and the clothing he was wearing and what colors and all of that. And I also picked up on his thoughts, and I heard his thoughts of, I need to get in there fast. I have to get in there. And then I picked up on another man's thoughts who was closer to the double doors of the operating room. And I heard his thoughts of, what does this guy think he's doing? He can't go in there. And then as the two guys came together, and the one who was rushing past me got to the double doors, there was a slight pause, and then the doors electronically opened, and he rushed on through. And then at that point, although I wanted to keep going to the waiting room or try to find it, it was as though I wasn't in control of where my consciousness was going anymore. And it was as though I was being pulled upward, and I was pulled up through the ceiling of the floor, and then up to another floor and through that ceiling until I went out the entire roof of the hospital and was outside, and then began moving laterally instead of up. I started moving horizontally and was being pulled toward the city of Anchorage itself, because the hospital was like on the outskirts of the city. And I was pulled over the city, and the city sits on a bay or an inlet. And as soon as I was at the area where I should be going out over water, this dark cave-like tunnel opened up, and I was pulled inside that. And once I was inside that, it was all dark, except for very far in the distance, there was this tiny pinprick of light. And as I got into this tunnel area, my speed picked up tremendously. I was going so much faster than I had been just going over the city. And as I was going extremely fast, this light was getting bigger and bigger as I was coming closer to it. And as I reached, at the end of this area, and the brightness was so extreme, I burst into the brightness and the light. And then I felt this tremendous sense where I had been feeling kind of calm before and just disinterested, except for wanting to get to my husband. Once I burst into this light, I felt this enormous peace and love and just unbelievable, indescribable emotions of acceptance and warmth and being home. Don't know how else to describe it, but I tried to figure out where I was, because it was a location where the ground was all like brown and rocky, very arid, almost desert-like, and that confused me. I couldn't figure out, well, where am I? If I'm dead, shouldn't I be in heaven? And shouldn't I be, someplace that's not brown and rocky? And
Yeah.
And so I looked down to where I thought my feet should be, because I still felt like I was inside a body of some kind, but I couldn't see any feet. I couldn't see any body parts at all. And at that point, another telepathic voice spoke to me, and it said, "Follow me." And the voice was off to my left. And so it drew my attention to the left. And there was a man who was off to the left, climbing up a slope up out of this area that I was down in. And as soon as he said, "Follow me," I was just a matter of a few feet behind him. And so I looked him all over his back, and he had like this mid-thigh length toga type garment, off-white type of a garment. And he had very black, dark hair that it was pulled back and tied with a piece of leather, and just a simple leather belt around his waist. And his legs, he had sandals, but they weren't like regular sandals. They had strips of leather that crisscrossed and tied up and up his legs and were tied off just below the knees. So I'm looking at all of this about him as I'm following, as we're going up. And my first thought was, well, this isn't Jesus. And I expected, if I was dead, that I was going to be seeing Jesus, be with Jesus. And yet I knew in my heart that whoever this was, it wasn't Jesus. And I felt like I should know him, and that he cared about me, but I had no idea who is it, because it isn't Jesus. So as I followed him, we went up over the top of this inclined slope and came out into a totally different landscape. And this landscape was lush and green and filled with meadow of all different types of flowers with colors that you can't even begin to describe, and trees and the grass and the trees and the leaves and the flowers, everything had light from within it, as though they were all alive and glowing from within. It fascinated me, and he had gone on ahead. I began to call him my guide. And so he, by this time, was quite a ways ahead, and he again said, "Follow me." And I was immediately right up and behind him again. And at this point, he was literally on the bank of a river. And the river itself, the first thing that popped into my mind is, this is the water of life. This is the living waters. And it sparkled and gleamed and seemed as alive as everything else. And then I realized that on the opposite bank of this river, I saw all of my deceased relatives. My dad, who had died when I was 7, and my brother, who was in a car accident and been killed, and different aunts and uncles, and then 4 other people that were there that I didn't really realize or remember who they were. And suddenly it dawned on me that those 4 were my 4 grandparents who had all died before I was born. And yet they were all there together, and I was feeling this enormous love from them. And it was like a huge family reunion or homecoming. It was like, oh, she's here. Isn't it wonderful? Oh, it's so great to see her, and I could
Did
feel.
you hear that, or you felt that?
I felt it telepathically, just like I did, you know, the other voices that took place during my near-death experience. They weren't, people's mouths weren't moving. It wasn't sound. It was telepathic. And so I immediately wanted to be there. And my guide again said to me, no, you can't go there now. We have to go somewhere else first. And so I really didn't have the choice. Where he went was where I had to go. So he kept going down along the bank of the river and then around a bend in the river. And as we came around the bend in the river, there was a big, huge opening. And in the midst of this, in the middle of this opening was an enormous building that was the closest thing I could compare it to would be like a Greek or a Roman temple, but it was pearlescent white. It was just glowing with this white coloration, and big columns, like Greek columns, Roman columns, and huge long line of stairs going up to it. Beautiful looking.
You remember your thoughts? Like, what are you thinking through all this? Or are you?
I was thinking, where am I? And this is so beautiful, but what is it? You know, and who are these other, because there were other spiritual beings that were there also. And they were together in small groups or going up the stairs, or a couple coming down the stairs. And I didn't feel that I knew who they were. And I didn't.
Can you tell me about those stairs?
Yeah, they were like marble stairs, very wide, you know, all like the whole huge front part of this building, and the whole width of it were these marble stairs, and then they went up and up for a very long ways, up to like big double wooden doors that were at the top. So my guide went up to those doors and said, follow me again. So I was up right behind him once again, and the doors opened, and once we went inside, it was almost as though it was an entirely different building, because the outside had looked totally Greek Roman temple type thing. Inside, once we were inside, it was an enormous library, and the library had tables all the way down through this huge, long, open room. And on either side, there were floors and floors and floors as high up as you could see, just crammed with books and with scrolls, old scrolls, and the spiritual beings that were at the tables and standing at the end of the tables, they were looking at books or at scrolls. And at that point, the guide said to me, or telepathically indicated, this is where the book of life is stored. And again, that was a biblical reminder to me, because I knew I had heard that term before, but really didn't really know anything in particular about it. But he said, but we're not staying here, we're going to a different room. And so we went the whole length of this whole open area and to the very back, and then entered another smaller high hallway. And then as we went just a short way down that hallway, there was a door and went into a much smaller room. And in that smaller room, there were already a whole group of spiritual beings that were all around like an oval conference table type thing, sitting, waiting, essentially waiting for us to come in. And once we came in, again, I felt like I should know who these people are. I know they love me. I know they care about me. I felt this love and acceptance the whole time I was there. And at that point, the guide said, we're going to review your life now. We're going to look at everything that's happened up to now. And the center of this oval conference table kind of became clear, but then it was as though a hologram appeared in it, in the center of it. And in this hologram were all of the events that had taken place in my life. And instead of just watching it like you'd watch a movie or a film strip, I became myself again in all of those circumstances. I relived them instantaneously. And I also got to experience being whoever the person was that I was interacting with in the scene as it was taking place. So I got to feel how I felt at the time, but also to feel how that other person felt because of something I said or whatever I had done.
These a mix of good experiences, bad experiences, insight into you, or?
It was good and bad experiences. And in the bad experiences, I would feel like, oh, I could have done a lot better. If only I'd known that that's what they were feeling when I was saying this or doing that. I had no idea. And yet I got to see how, if I hurt them, how they took that away, and then how they acted with somebody else they interacted with afterwards because of the hurt that they carried from the meanness that I had exhibited, or, you know, but the opposite with the good things also. You know, I would take something that I had really never given a second thought to, but it really meant a lot to that other person. And it changed how they felt about themselves, how they acted afterward, and how they treated other people afterward. And that seemed to be the main lesson that I was supposed to be absorbing, was your actions and how you feel toward other people mean a lot more than you can realize. And you need to keep that in mind. It's part of how you grow, and it's part of how your spirit grows. And so where I was feeling terrible and kind of beating myself up with the things I wished I had done differently, they were feeling as though, oh, it's okay. You know, you have to be able to understand both sides of things in order to be able to grow yourself. And that's really all it's about. It's not, you know, a huge thing, but it's part of what you need to know. And then they said, you know, you can stay if you want, or you can return back to your life. But if you have to make this choice, we want to show you things that'll happen in your life if you do decide you're going to go back to it. And just so that you know, some of these things definitely will happen, but some of them may or may not happen, because everybody has free will. And everyone you interact with in your life, if you return to it, will have their own ability to make a free will choice. And they may not choose what we're projecting here. And so that will change the whole situation.
Was this still a telepathic by like one voice, that when this instruction was given, this decision?
Yes, essentially it was, when it came to the instructional parts, that generally always came from my guide that I'd been following all along. And it was to basically to clarify what I was, you know, being shown, and how I needed to weigh things about deciding whether to stay or go.
Was everything telepathic from the guide? It was, yes, always telepathic. Okay.
Yep, it was always telepathic. So anyway, then I was shown these future things that may happen, or some that definitely would happen. And then I know that there's something else that took place, but for whatever reason, it's been taken from my memory, and I don't remember that portion of it. And the next thing that I was actually consciously aware of, my guide and I were in a totally different room, and it was just an even smaller room, and it was just him and I there. And he was saying to me, I want to show you what's happening in the hospital waiting room. And when he communicated that to me, it was as though I could see, as though there were no ceiling at all, as though I could see directly from above into the room where my husband and the kids and were there in this little waiting room. And what I was being shown was my husband was up by the doorway to the waiting room, and the doctor who had operated on me was standing there in his surgical garb and, you know, hair thing, head thing, and he was talking to my husband. And the two kids were like behind him and over by this little couch. And then my guide said, and I also want you to see this. And it was as though I could look off to the side. And he said, what I'm showing you is the prayers of all the people that you asked to pray for you about this operation. And as I looked off and I saw that, each of the prayers was represented as if it was like a note on a musical score. And so there'd be like a half note and a whole note, a quarter note, and each one of them was linking to each other and coming up and up, higher and higher. And he said, every prayer has its own unique vibration. And each of these prayers is reaching up. And as it got close to where we were, then he showed me back in the waiting room again, and he showed me that my daughter was praying that I hadn't died, because she was scared and thought that if the doctor was there and it had been such a long time, that maybe he was there to say that I had died. And so she prayed that I wouldn't die. And that was the last musical note. And when that happened, it was as though the guide allowed me to feel all of my human emotions again. And so I was feeling how much I wanted to be there for my kids growing up. And that even though there was so much love and so much there that I was just imbued with, that I still wanted them not to have to grow up without a parent like I did. So, you know, that kind of made my decision for me. I needed to go back to my life, in spite of what I'd been shown about the future and stuff. So he said to me at that point, he said, okay, you can return to your life. He said, you will be able to remember enough about this experience that you'll know for certain that how real it is. But you won't remember everything that took place, and you won't remember anything about your future that we showed you. Because if you remembered all these future things, you'd no longer have your free will, because you would act according to what you think you were supposed to do, as opposed to sincerely acting from your own heart and from your own free will. And that's the last thing I remember him saying, other than saying I would have a proof. I'd have a proof that all of this had happened. And then the next thing I was aware of, I was waking up in the recovery room, and my husband and the kids were both there. And immediately I was still filled with all the enormous love and peace and joy. And I thought, well, absolutely nothing like this have I ever felt before. I know that this really happened. And so I thought, that's my proof. And then I was in the hospital for 12 days and in ICU, and then, you know, later on to a floor. And at some point in that whole situation, fairly soon after, I had a doctor come in to visit me as a follow-up, And as soon as he walked through the doorway, I realized that it was the man that I had been told to pay attention to in the hospital hallway. And so I realized then that he had to have been rushing that other way because he was coming to take care of me. So anyway, after I got discharged and I was home, and they had to cut me open from stem to stern, from my breastbone to the pubic bone, and open up and take out intestine and do everything to try to find where my artery had been cut, and to try to save me. And the doctor had to take vein out of one of my legs to make a patch onto the artery. And because of this, I was from top to bottom, I had staples to staple me together. And after I'd been home for a while, I had to go back to this surgeon to have him remove those staples. And I made up my mind that I was going to ask him. He had been so kind and so nice to me, unlike the doctor who originally operated on me, who every time he came into the room, he couldn't look me in the eye. It was like he was looking off somewhere else and he didn't want to be there. And, you know, he had cut that artery by mistake, and I think he was afraid for his medical license or something. But the other doctor who had been called in was always very kind. And so I thought, well, I'm going to tell him what I saw when I left my body, and ask him about it, you know, because I believe that this is true, but my husband's having a hard time grasping all that I've told him about all this. So, and he was there with me when I went to get those staples out. So I said to the doctor, this is what I saw, you know, and I said, you were wearing, you know, this color jacket, and this is, you know, you were rushing down, and I'm in your thoughts, I heard you thinking this, and is that what happened that day? And he said, how could you know that? He said, I was in my office and I was seeing patients, and I got called stat to the OR for a bleed, and to try to save a person, you know, who had bled out. And he said, yeah, I had my clothes that I had worn in the office seeing patients, and that's why I had that on. And to me, that meant a lot, because if I had made something up, I guess I probably would have imagined that somebody who was on call in the hospital would have been called in, you know, to try to help if somebody needed help. I wouldn't have thought of somebody coming from their office and in street clothes. So that really kind of was a proof to me, similar to like my guide had said, you'll have proof. So that was what happened. And then 30 some years later, I was encouraged to try to find this surgeon and, you know, thank him and ask him, did he remember me sharing about my near-death experience? So I looked up, I remembered his name, and I looked him up, and he was still practicing in Alaska. We had moved back to New York. And then on to, like, now we're retired in North Carolina. And I found him, and so I emailed and, you know, said who I was and did he remember, and he did. He remembered that I had shared about my near-death experience, and he said he'd had other patients since then over the years that had also shared experiences, but none quite like mine, he said. And then he also went on to tell me that he had become like the head of the surgical department and had trained other doctors to do the technique that he used that managed to save my life. So they'd been able to save other people. So that was pretty neat.
So after you tried to tell your husband about this, did you talk about it to other people? Did you just put it away? What did you make of it or do with it?
I did try to talk to other people. and particularly when it came to church, you know, because I tried to talk to people within church. And within 6 months after this happened, we had to sell our house in Alaska and move back to New York again. And so we're in a totally different church than we had been before. But I wanted to try to share it with people. And I found that I didn't get a very good response at all. I think people just, they just couldn't wrap their head around it, I guess. And so they just kind of shut me off. And because they did, I just, you know, I learned to try to research things on my own, but not really to talk to people about it much at all, because it wasn't a very good response. And that's how it stayed until, you know, many years later when we retired. And we happened to retire to a location that's very close to the international location for ions. We don't live that far from it. We're in a smaller town, but not far at all from Durham, which is where they're located. So I got to go to some meetings there. And by going to the meetings and hearing other people and meeting other people who had experiences like mine, that's when I really began to get the courage to speak up and share and tell my own story.
That's how you know Yvonne.
Yeah.
I spoke there in, I think it was 2019, 18, November of 18, probably.
Yeah, I was here by that time. I don't, you know, I didn't always make all of the meeting, and I don't honestly remember you coming and speaking to one of the meetings there, but I've seen lots of other folks that have, and you know.
Yeah, it may not have been November. I think it was the fall of 18, because I think it's just 4/19. So,
Yeah. But I definitely was here at that time. We moved down here in 2009.
Okay.
So, and it was within a couple years after I moved down here that I began to found the meetings and began to go to some of them.
I've heard several NDEers talk about what you did about like being in a big library and the Book of Life and things like that. What do you make of that? Have you learned more about that and what that means?
Yeah, I've done a lot of my own research, and so I think there's also a similarity to what some people call the Akashic Records. And I think it's similar to that. And it's basically a repository of all people's lives. And that when they are there, that they actually get to study, you know, literally almost like pull out a book that, unlike our books with pages that we have here, it really is more like that holographic experience that I had, that you start to look at a book, but then it becomes alive and you're able to actually revisit all of these life events.
It makes me think how, I'm sorry, it makes me think how so many of us NDEers come back and eventually, maybe not right away, are suddenly compelled to write a book.
Yeah.
You know, and
I think
it almost makes me think that, and you know, through my NDEs, things that happened made me wonder later when I'm thinking about it all. It makes me think that everything in our lives is recorded somehow in heaven.
Oh yeah.
As we're living. Yep. Because during my drowning, a memory of mine was used while I was still under the water before I come up, to help me realize that I was dead. It was just a simple memory of me as this little kid looking in a fish bowl, and there was this treasure chest at the bottom, and I'm wondering, you know, I wonder why the fish aren't afraid of that treasure chest. I'd ask my mom, you know, and somehow I was shown or told or understood the fish knew something I didn't, that I was dead. Not the fish in the fish bowl, but, you know, the fish in the pond where I was, because they were bumping into me. And when they were bumping into me, I thought, well, why are they afraid of me? Because when I was a little girl, you know, fishing with dad, us kids would try to catch fish with our bare hands, and they were afraid of us. But here I am at the bottom of the pond, and they're just bumping into me, and I'm just pushing off the side like driftwood, and they're going right in front of me, and I'm looking at their fins and their mouths and their tail. Why aren't they afraid of me? And how it was explained to me wasn't a telepathic voice. It was a scene opened up of me, a memory of me looking in that fishbowl before. And so, you know, as I got a lot older, I think back about that, and I'm like, and it hit me, a memory was used to teach me. So where did they get my memories? What happens to our memories? And with the twins, when I was 25 and I had that NDE, I was shown a scene that wasn't even my life or anybody I knew, but this little scene of this boy in this store throwing a fit. And that was God's way of teaching me, I believe, that look how you're acting. You're acting like that. You're acting like a spoiled child throwing a fit in the store. The answer is no. You know, because I wanted to go back and raise my kids, you know, and the answer was no. Yeah. And so, you know, as I got a lot older and I look back after the shock factor wears off of, oh my God, what happened? Why am I seeing these memories? And, you know, was it NDE, whatever. And so it just, when you say that in that room, I've heard several other NDEers talk about that. And I just come to the conclusion, because I don't know any better, I'm just guessing like everybody else, that it seems like everything, like what we're doing right now, is stored somewhere in heaven. And does it go in those books in that room that you saw? You know, there's just questions that we won't know till we're there for sure, you know, but it plays with my imagination and my trying to understand how this works. So we can't help it. I mean, we just got a glimpse. We don't have the whole picture. We don't have all the answers. We just have our little glitch, and everybody else has their little glip, you know, this little clip. And then just try to listen to them all. And then when you see these similarities, it's just like, you just kind of latch on to them. It's like, okay, I'm seeing a picture here.
Yeah. I found that with lots of other people's NDEs, you know, that I've, of course, through going to the meetings and also reading. One of the things I wanted to do after it happened to me was learn about anybody else who might have had anything like this. And so I did begin to read books and things. And I don't know about you, but with me, when I would read certain things about someone's experience, it would just resonate. And I'd say, yes, that resonates with me. That's what I think. That's similar. That's so similar to what I felt and what I experienced. And then other times it would be very, very different than mine. Right. And I didn't have that same feeling of resonating with it, but still I realized that it was their experience that was needed for them. Because one of the things I've come to believe, and it's just me, I guess, is that I think everybody who has a near-death experience and remembers it, they'll come to realize how much it was tailored exactly to what they needed. Once they actually were alive again and living again, what it had within it was so important and educational for them and for how they were going to go forward with their life. And that makes perfect sense to me, because I think God is so big. God can't be contained in any one person's box and fit all of their individual parameters exactly. God is way bigger than that. And God is all of what every different person's unique near-death experience is, and so much more.
Yeah. And for the NDEs to be tailored just for us, they have to know us completely. So there again, I'm thinking, so they do have to know every thought, every memory, every experience to be able to play this back to us in a way that we get it for when we come back, how we interpret it and how we use it because if I would have had a completely different experience, my life would have been completely different.
Mm-hmm.
As
Yeah.
I suppose anyone's, if I was just shown these beautiful meadows and, flew on the butterfly wing, and
Mhm.
I probably have been suicidal during
Yeah.
hard times in my life.
Yeah.
And so I think God knows don't give that to her.
Yeah.
She'll be taking something coming back here. Don't show her that,
And I feel the same way with some of the experiences. Like a lot of near-death experiencers have very cosmic experiences of universes and space and planetary trips through all of that, that type of thing. And I think to myself, if that's what I had experienced, it wouldn't have impacted me in the same way at all. But for that particular person, it was exactly what they needed to realize how big and awesome God actually is, our creator actually is. That was what they needed to be impacted with. But my experience was very much unique to me for what I needed to be impacted with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
So,
amazing. It's a gift that keeps giving.
Yeah.
It seems the more, we can push it away and say, that's ridiculous, that couldn't have happened. It seems like as we get older, we open it back up and look at it. And honestly, I feel like you have to be over 55 to get it. I do. I'm prejudiced because I just wasn't getting it until I got in my 50s. I just wasn't having those aha moments and seeing the magnitude, the glory, the appreciation, all those things. And I just feel I had to be a certain age in my time in my life before I could. There's a season for everything. And, these people are in their 20s and 30s that are trying to pick apart their NDE. And I'm thinking, keep trying, because you're really not, I could be prejudiced, but you're really not going to get it until you get older. Yeah. And I think it takes that mindset.
And like I said, I was retired before I really was ever at a point where I felt like I could speak to people and could share my experience. And because I'd been in the medical field and scientific medical field, I was one of these people that was really trying to pick things apart. And that may be the reason why I got to see the doctor who saved me before he came in and be able to ask him, was that what you were wearing that day and stuff? Because I'm one of those analytical mind people that will pick things apart and try to get every single solitary detail.
Yeah.
And so it
was 30 years for me too before I asked my doctor. But see, I saw my doctor every year, yearly appointments, and sometimes even sooner than that. And so all those years I kept that same doctor from my 25-year-old NDE, and it was 30 years before. And I took my husband with me, and I said, I've always wanted to ask him. I've been too scared. I'm chickened out every time, and I'm going to do it this time. And I took him with me, and we was done with the examination, everything. I said, I need to talk to you about something. He said, okay. And the nurse was standing there, and I briefly told him. I said, do you remember when I lost the twins with ectopic pregnancy? He said, yeah. And I said, do you remember that I refused to go home and you said there was nothing wrong, and that you said I could just stay overnight, if it'd make me feel better? I was like, oh, yeah. He remembered everything, just like your doctor did. 30 years, they do. And so I went through the ND briefly, and I said, that's why I refused to go home, because I just died and was in heaven. And he said, I believe you. He says, all of my years of practicing medicine, I have come to believe exactly what you're talking about. And the nurse said, oh, he does too. He does too. And so that I felt so good. It was such a burden off of me. I was so light on my feet. I was so excited. I was hugging my husband when I left and crying. It's like, I finally did it. It was such a big thing to finally to speak to my doctor about that.
Yeah. Well, in my church that I attend here now in North Carolina, very, very different attitudes than what I had run into before. And I signed up for a 4-year course that is called Education for Ministry. and it's meant for lay people, but it's for lay people to try to get a much bigger understanding of their faith and what they may see as their own personal ministry. And during that course, I was in it with a doctor who was a retired vascular surgeon. And part of what we did in the course was share our own personal experiences. And so I shared, even in that environment, about my near-death experience. And that retired surgeon is the one who urged me to try to get a hold of that doctor all those years later, because he said, I have no doubt he will remember you. He said, what happened to you doesn't happen every day. And he said, if he was the one who was able to somehow bring you back, he said, believe me, he won't forget it. I've remembered, patients that I've had where it's been that drastic a situation. So he's the one who encouraged me. And the other parts about that course that were wonderful were we met once a week. And over the 4 years, we studied the Old Testament, the New Testament, early Christianity, the church, and then world philosophies and world religions and beliefs. So it was really in depth, and I got to learn an awful lot about everything regarding Judaism and early Christianity, the teachings of Jesus, how the books were decided that were included in the New Testament, which ones weren't, how the church evolved, from being just the followers of Jesus up through being the Roman religion of choice for Rome, and all the way through to the present, and all about other faiths and things. And that was very, very interesting. And like I said, it took commitment and study, because it was once a week for 4 years, and learned an awful lot through that.
Are you a minister now? Did that give you a certificate or no?
No, it was entirely for lay people, for just regular parishioners, who wanted to learn in depth more about their own faith. And some of the members of the group actually were kind of agnostic even. It's interesting. I believe they still offer it. It's Education for Ministry, and it's put on by Sewanee School of the South, I think it is. Gosh, I don't remember now all the details, but a lot of very, very deep books that we're studying in conjunction, not just, the Bible, but lots of other textbooks and things.
My husband and I was working on a short job in New Jersey a few years ago, and I woke up early one morning before work, and I was just told to talk about my NDE at work that day. And I'm like, no way am I going to talk to these workers, about my NDE. They don't want to hear it. No. And I was like, I'm going to have to, because this was just so clear. And so that day I brought it up in this little group. A couple guys just kind of walked away and rolled their eyes, but one guy stayed, and he started talking. He says, I always wondered what that was that happened to me. And he started talking about something. He didn't know the word near-death experience. Yeah. But he was so interested and just started telling his story. And I'm like, what do you know?
That's
and then,
what we were supposed to do.
And then my husband, a couple of years after that, my husband and I was working on a job, big thunderstorm come, and we all ran through the mud to get in the trailer and all huddled together, waiting for the storm to go. And I thought, what am I going to do? Entertain myself sitting here with all these men. It's probably 10 of us in this little tool trailer. And something just come over me, talk about your NDE, talk about your death. Oh no, they're going to run out in the rain, get away from me. And so I started talking, and half of them turned their back and started having their own conversations about when they were in jail and a fight they were in, that kind of stuff. But one great big burly guy just sat there listening, and he had more of a, what you would call an after-death communication situation than an, type of, and then like an NDE kind of mixed in it, and he didn't know what to make of it. And he still wasn't sure after talking to me. He said, but you got me thinking. Yeah. He said, you got me thinking. And it's just like, yeah, it's a gift that keeps on giving, but it's also a gift to share. And I have found the more we share, something happens. There's always somebody around that needed to hear it. I mean, yeah, we're going to get doors closed in our face. We're going to lose, some people are going to think we're crazy. Like as people, when you first start talking at church, they're going to think, oh, this is the crazy lady. Somebody's trying to get attention. And you take that risk. And I wouldn't take that risk for a couple decades. I wouldn't do it because I had a career and I wasn't going to look like that crazy person. And I wasn't really one to stand around and talk either. I wasn't like a stand around gossip kind of person, like a lot of people do. I just wasn't. I was like, I got to work. I got to work. I got to work. I go home, take care of my family. And then I didn't stand around and tell stories. And then, so yeah, it's like in my mid 50s that I just started opening up and coming to light.
I know what you mean. And I had thought, well, like you were talking about writing a book and stuff. And I thought seriously about that. And then for whatever reason, it just wasn't gelling for me in that way. And that was when I began to get asked about speaking, and sharing my experience in interviews like we're doing today. And when I started doing that a few years ago, right from the beginning, someone asked, do you want to leave your email address in case somebody wants to email you? And I thought, well, yeah, I wouldn't mind that. And so that's what I've kind of routinely done. And what I've found is that what has grown from that, from the individuals who reached out to me and that I was able to help one-on-one, they have been able to spread out to do a number of other things. Like one young man who reached out to me, he just had a strong, compelling feeling that he wanted to bring near-death experiences into the church environment and try to help people within the church get a handle on how it could fit with what they already believed, as opposed to being something that was not appropriate for what they believed. And so he literally started going to churches, and he had this one church in particular that was willing to have like a Zoom conference type of thing. And he asked me if I would speak and if I would share my experience. And then he would follow up with the individuals within the church itself. And so we did that. And he's stayed in touch with me ever since. And some of the members, like you said, turned their back and no, this was not right for them. But others actually shared their own experiences or experiences of loved ones that they had heard. And so it opened their minds in ways that hadn't been opened before. And he's continued to do that and continued to touch bases with me and ask me for thoughts and stuff too. So you never know. It's just like the ripple effect we were shown in our life reviews, where you don't know who is supposed to hear it and what they're supposed to do or will choose to do afterward. And so it's just important. And to me, for whatever reason, telling my story is my vehicle as opposed to writing a book, I think. But it's different for everybody.
I just got something says my bandwidth is off. My internet's messing up. Are you doing okay over there? Is your picture okay?
Periodically you have frozen just briefly, but that's it.
Okay.
But I'm doing fine.
You were freezing just a little bit ago too. It might be my internet. So, okay. Well, it's been great. I gotta go visit my mom and sister in a nursing home now. I got a call right before we started this from the nursing home. My mom's upset and stuff. So okay, I'll go here after a bit and see them. So luckily they started visits again where, you weren't allowed to for a while.
Oh, I know.
And then they started them up and we got a 4-hour visit one day. It's only supposed to be, I think, 30 minutes and we used 4 hours. And then right after that, they got COVID outbreak again. And so they stopped visits and they called today. I says, well, you guys don't have visits right now. He's like, oh, we just started back up. So I'm off to the nursing home.
Wow, that's good. That's good. I'm glad we finally were able to get this together. I hope that
Yes.
worked out well for you too.
Yes, it was easy as pie today. I was like, I'm determined.
Yeah.
I'm going to get this. I'm going to beat my head against the wall, but I'm going to get it. And so finally, I got it. Now the next step is learning how to edit. So that's the next beating my head against the wall thing. But I want to do this so bad. I just don't know how, but I'm going to learn. I just turned 60, so you know these things don't come easy for our age
and
group.
I'm 71.
Yeah, I mean, some people, I guess, you know, have had background from their jobs in this, I don't know, in computers, but it's always been hard for me. I have trouble with remote control.
Well, I'll tell you what, there are sometimes the electronic side effects of after people have had near-death experiences too.
I gave up wearing a watch years ago. I didn't know why then, but I just something about me, I can't wear them. They just stop. I can't keep the battery going. The battery just drains. So heck with it. And then I started hearing this NDE stuff like that. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I've noticed
the funniest thing, my dad, who died when I was 7, that I mentioned to you during my experience, after I had my near-death experience and learned about the electronic side effects and stuff like that, it popped back a memory of him. And I remember my mother saying that my dad never could wear a watch, that watches always stopped on him. And I have letters of his from World War II, when he was in World War II. And in his letters, he talks about surviving, an attack on a ship that he was on, and that the wording in the letter to my mother, he said, "My guide is still with me. Don't worry about it." So I know he was a very spiritual person, and I suspect he literally had a near-death experience at some point in his life.
I hope someday scientists can figure that out exactly, the whole watch thing and messing with electronics thing.
I know.
You know, and into ears. I hope they can figure that out. It's like, but all I know is that I can be so tired or whatever, and get talking about NDEs or watch something about NDE, or I just get so excited, like this ball of energy just gonna burst, and like I'll be full of energy the rest of the day today. Yeah, talking about NDE, it's just like, who needs caffeine? You know, because like you start talking about your NDE and you'll come alive. I don't know what it is, but
I can't believe we got to talk like this. I really am.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll talk to you later. I'll catch you up on Facebook.
Yeah. Hey, when you broadcast this, if you want to stick my email address in there for people, if they should want to,
you want to go ahead and say it, and then they'll have it.
Sure. My email is blanceth@live.com.
There you go.
Thanks.
Okay. I'll talk to you later, Karen.
Yep. Bye.
Bye-bye, sweetie. Let's see.